Good afternoon. Good after, no, not noon only, of course, all around the world. Good morning, good evening. Welcome back to our next webinar. And today we'll have Tobias Fenster, one of our, gurus, leads on using containers, together with Jakub and Freddie picking up on that. They are the ones that started introducing Docker and containers to our world. And today he will pick up with this topic of running multiple containers on Azure. Toby had a big change today, being new at a different company starting up today, and I'm very pleased that you still are able to join in today, Toby, because I guess starting a new job somewhere else, it's an overload of a lot of things. So a big compliment, of course, up ahead already, and let's see at the end, but probably knowing you, that will be an interesting hour with a lot of information. Welcome to you all, and I guess people are still logging in. We know probably all that we are recording this session. It's already running. You know, might be knowing that your mic will stay muted, but of course we do want you to be involved in the sense of if you have questions, if you have maybe some ideas or whatever, feel free to use the question window to put them there. I'm the moderator of today. My name is Luc van Vught, if you hadn't recognized my voice and the fact that I was on the first slide. And I will be picking up the questions, and depending on the moment of what Toby is discussing or presenting, I will be maybe stepping in with your question or wait for a later moment. And of course, at the end, we will have, in general, we have some time also for questioning. So feel free to use the question window. I will be picking them up. As you know, it will be recorded. Thanks to a lot of you that have been subscribing to our YouTube channel. We passed the 100, what is it, a little over a week ago, and now we have a custom URL which is more recognizable than some strange combination of characters. The webinars newsletter, of course, spread the word, get people involved. We're growing, and yes, this is a very valid, a very worthwhile number of resources to be used. Upcoming webinars, you can find them on our website too. These are the ones that have been planned for the next month or so. October 29, there is a gap on the 15th. If there's anybody having an issue, a topic or whatever, feel free to let me know. There is, in the rhythm of 2 weeks, there is a gap between now and the 29th. And of course, after the 26th of November, on the 10th of December, and going on into January, we will be planning more, but feel free to give us more and more ideas on that. Of course, before we start, I always want to thank our sponsor to make this possible, providing us the GoToWebinar sessions. And well, that's the point for handing off to Toby. I've been working with Toby in the past and we met in Ulm in Germany. I have very lively and very nice memories on that, and I'm very happy that we keep on running into each other, Toby, like on NAV Tech Days. Surely now you have become MVP. It is now for 2 years, I guess. And yeah, for those of you who have been following Toby and his blog, they know that he's one of the guys to turn to if you want to know something about containers. So probably that's why you registered and logged in for today. So Toby, I'm going to hand over the session in that sense that I'm going to make you presenter right now. So go for it.
Okay, you should be seeing my screen by now.
Right, yeah.
Perfect. So first of all, thanks for allowing me to join today to share the stuff that I have prepared, and also thanks for picking it up after the end of NAV Skills, the webcast series. Good to see that this has been continuing, and the, I guess, 3 webinars that have happened before I personally really liked. So thanks a lot for picking that one up, and of course thanks for allowing me to join today.
Welcome.
As Luc already said, I started a new position today that presented me with a couple of technical challenges. I hope I've been able to overcome all. The last one now was that I'm joining by phone instead of by my headset and laptop. So I'm hoping the audio is fine. If not, please do let me know. I'm Tobias Fenster. As Luc already said, I'm working a lot on containers in connection with NAV and Business Central. Since today, I'm the CTO for Cosmo Consult, but I've been working on that topic for a couple of years now. So I guess if you've joined, you've seen containers, the usage that Freddie Christensen, especially by Microsoft, has started to share his scripts and the benefits of using containers on Docker. And I'm today going to present a specific scenario and a couple of solutions that you can tackle those. But to introduce you to that scenario, I want to make sure that we're on the same page of what that scenario is and what problem we're trying to solve. So if you're using Docker containers, you probably know that this allows you to very cleanly and easily run multiple versions and CUs of Business Central on the same VM. Where we had in the past a challenge that we had to jump through a couple of hoops to have multiple versions installed on the same machine. Maybe even had to uninstall and reinstall if we wanted to do that. Now we have Docker containers, and that's a way to isolate those environments from each other and make sure that when you're running multiple versions on the same VM, they're separated cleanly, they work as expected, you don't have any side effects if you change something in one installation but not in the other. Another thing that is helping with Docker containers is that they have a much lower resource overhead than full VMs. I'm not going to go into detail there. You might want to check out the first Tech Day session that I had together with Freddie and Jakub Vanak in 2017, if I remember correctly, where we introduced a lot of that. Or you can find a lot of resources on the web about that, but just put it that way today. If you have a VM, you also have a Windows server running. Now, if you have a container, you don't have a Windows server running, so you can reuse the Windows server of the host. That means if you run 5 VMs, then you have 5 Windows servers running. If you run 5 containers, then you have only 1 Windows server running. So that allows you to have a much lower resource overhead. That also means that creating and starting and stopping and also deleting containers is a lot quicker. You can, of course, prepare your VMs so that they are starting rather quickly, but still it's a lot of overhead. While creating a new container, starting it, stopping it, literally it's a matter of seconds. Or when you're talking about starting, if you start the full container, including a SQL server and IIS, that might take a minute or two, but still a lot quicker than the full VM. And you have it, if you have it running once and you restart it, it should only take a couple of seconds. So you have a lot of benefits by running Docker containers, and you have a lot of benefits by running multiple containers on one VM. So that makes a lot of sense. But the problem now becomes if you want to run multiple containers on a VM, and that happens not to be on your machine or not your laptop, then the question is how can you connect to those containers? So imagine a scenario where you have one central VM or multiple central VMs, and you want to provide your development, test, whatever containers. Now, how do you connect the laptops or the other machines inside of your network to that VM? With that VM being either something that is running on-prem on your own data center, or it's running on Azure. And that means we have slightly different solutions for that problem. But we'll tackle that one step by step. So the first demo is what happens if we run just the standard configuration. I'm using plain Docker commands because I'm just used to that. But if you're running the NAV container helper that Freddie Christensen has provided, that is basically a new NAV container commandlet that I'm now running. And the thing that I want to do first is to just run a container and see what happens. So for the same reason that I previously mentioned. Copy here and paste here. Yeah. For the reason that I previously mentioned, that I just joined Cosmo, I don't have access, of course, to the infrastructure of my previous company, so I can't show you this on a regular VM. So I've just created a VM on Azure, and through nested virtualization, now I have a VM running inside of the VM. But that's just for background why I'm doing it that way. Just consider this is on the left-hand side where it says host on the top left. This is the container host, so where the containers are running. And then I have a second virtual machine running on the same virtual network. That is the client. So what we basically want to do is we want to run our containers on that machine on the left. And then we want to try to connect to the same machine, to the container, sorry, from the machine on the right. And I'll try to show you the challenges in that and show you the solutions for that. So the first one is actually just running a standard container. And just to show you the full scenario, I'll also run a second one, copy that one as well, and paste it in here. I want some special character in the beginning, so I'll try to get rid of that one and start that one as well. So in the meantime, we can see the first container is about to start. This is just the regular container startup. For those of you who might not have seen that one, it's starting a SQL server. It's starting an Internet Information Server, or IIS, to have the web client. It's creating a .NET Web Server instance that is basically the web client, and it's starting the service tier, that is the NAV or Business Central service tier that is starting over there. And now it's creating the necessary users and enabling access to those users. So in that scenario, I haven't provided any configuration for the networking. The only parameters, the only parameters that I've added is that I'm accepting the end user license agreement, and I'm disabling the use of SSL. That is just to avoid those error messages that you might have seen where it says that it's unsafe to connect because it's using a self-signed certificate. So I don't want to do that. Okay, so what is happening? We have the first one that has started. Just to show you maybe the IP configuration of that machine. It doesn't have an internet connection, but that doesn't matter here. I can see that network. Yeah, so it's just a public network. It's got its own IP address, and that's it. But you can also see that that container got a kind of weird looking IP address. So that is something that Docker provides. So now I have access to that machine, but only from the host. So if I now look for the second container, that one also got an IP address that starts with 172.24, a different one, and that allows me to connect from the host. So if I just copy that one, use a browser on the host, paste that IP address, HTTP, and DC, then I should be able to connect. Oh, not. What am I missing? Sorry, still NAV. Okay, so now I should be able to connect. So this is still on the host. So imagine that this is your laptop, then you're able to connect to that machine. But what happens when your colleague wants to connect? Or what happens if this is indeed a centralized VM and someone else wants to connect? So I'm switching to my client machine and try to access that IP address. I need to paste, sorry, that's the old one. So I just type it, 172.24.61.158/NAV. So I'm trying to connect from another machine, but because that networking that happens when I just do a Docker run without any further configuration is only available on the host, I'm unable to connect. So I've successfully created 2 containers. I can connect to those 2 containers from the host machine, but as you can see, by the time this is taking to connect, another machine is not able to connect this, and this is the German message that says, I can't connect to that machine. It has taken too long. Please make sure you have a valid network connection to that machine. So this is basically the problem that I've shown you, the base scenario. I'm able to create those Docker containers, but I'm unable to use them from somewhere else. So I'll just quickly remove them again to clean up and make sure that we don't use resources that we will need in the future soon. And in order that we don't need to wait, I'm starting the second container already, and I'll explain to you in a minute what is happening, just to make sure we're not again looking at the startup, because that one will look very similar. So this is the base standard configuration, and we have a couple of options to solve that one. And the first solution is to map the ports. Mapping the ports means that you have ports, network connection ports inside of your container, and you can map those to ports on the host. What that means is that on the left-hand side, I have my client machine, and on the right-hand side, I have my Docker host. Now I have my NAV or Business Central container running, and let's say I want to expose port 7045 to 7049, which is the traditional Windows client, the OData and the SOAP web service, and also the new development endpoint that I need to connect from Visual Studio Code. And in that example, I have just connected them to 7045 to 7049 on the host. That means that a laptop is, for example, able to connect to port 7049 to use the Visual Studio Code development environment. Now I'm putting a second container on that host like we've just done because of the resource overhead improvements that I get there. And I again have 7045 to 7049 on the container. But now, because they are used on the host already, I can't bind them to 7045 to 7049 on the host again. That would be a conflict. So instead, I can instruct Docker to connect that one to 7145 to 7149. That means that if I want to connect to that second container from Visual Studio Code, I need to use port 7149. And then imagine a third container. You will probably be able to guess how that one works. I also need to connect to 7045 to 7049. I connect that to 7245 to 7249. And of course, now I need to connect using 7249. The same is true for the web client. So if I want to connect to port 80, I can map that one once to port 80 on the host, but the second one now needs a different port like 8080 or 8180 or whatever I want to use. That's actually arbitrary unless it is not already used. So I can just use those. Again, let me show you how that works. We already have the first one. I'll also start the second one over here because the first one has already started. Just kick off the second one, and then I'll explain what is happening. Okay, here we go. So what is happening for the first one is that the command that you see over here actually looks pretty similar to the one that we had before. The only difference now is that we have used that -p or port parameter. What that one says is that we want to use port 8080 on the host, so the left one, and then the colon and port 80. That means that we connect port 8080 on the host to port 80 on the container. And then we have a second one that connects 7049 to 7049 in the container. So I'm reusing that port for the development endpoint, and I'm using a different port, 8080, to connect to the web client. And the second one that we're using, make that one a bit bigger so we see everything. That one is connecting 8180 to port 80. So we should be able to reach the web client on port 8180. And also we're opening port 7149 and connecting that one to 7049. So if you were to connect Visual Studio Code to that one, then we would need to use port 7149. In order for this to work, if you just try this, then you might still not be able to connect. And the reason for that is that usually your Windows server has a firewall in place, and that firewall will disallow that connection on 8080 and 8180. So what I need to do now is I have to type it correctly, of course. And I open the firewall settings. We go to incoming rules. And what we're basically doing is we just allow incoming traffic on port 8080 and on port 8180 to connect to that machine. So I'm adding 8080, 8180. I allow the connection for every network, and I give it a name. Since I'm very creative today, I'm going to name it that way. And this is done. And now we should be able to connect. So let's try that one. We already have the first container in place. That one should be reachable on 8080. And as you can see, I'm using the German container version here. So if we now connect to our host machine on port 8080, we should be able to reach a German Business Central, the admin user, and I need to type the provided password that you also find in the log. So you can see here where I got the password, and then it should be able to connect. This is, of course, the first connection to SQL Server and the first connection to the NAV server instance, so that one might take a bit. In the meantime, I'll also open the connection to 8180, I think I used. Let me double check. Yes, I used 8180. So I'll use that here as well. So I'm connecting to the same host machine, but I'm using a different port because we connected that one to a different port. And I'm adding that password here. So let's see. Okay, first I need to reload. Try again. And I put in the password. So let's see where we get connected. You can see here the beautiful German word of Verkaufsauftragverarbeitung, whoever came up with that one. So you see this is the German version. So we're connected actually to container 1. And as you can already see here, okay, now I lost the connection again, but you can see here in the title page that this is the sales order processor. So we're able to connect to the W1 version, and that is what we started over here. So if I go to the second container start and scroll up a bit, then you can see here that I used for the second one, the W1 container. So this is connected to 8180, and as expected, we now get the English version. So this is a way to connect to those containers. Yes, Luc?
Yuri Popov is asking a very valid question. So you have your mapping done and you find out that actually you mistyped or it's the wrong port for your firewall settings. Can you easily now adjust that, or do you need to do a lot of reconfiguration? So let's say you
that
have
actually is something. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually something that you can't change on a running machine. That's one of the problems. I'll share that in a minute on the next slide. Let me just delete those in the meantime so they can get away while we're talking. That is something that is one of the problems with that approach, is that you can only set those port mappings when you initially are creating the container. So when you do the first start of that container, you can set those port mappings. If you later recognize that you missed one or you misconfigured or whatever, then you need to throw that container away and restart. Now, if you just use that container to connect it to an existing SQL server that is running somewhere else, that shouldn't be a problem at all, because that's basically like recreating a NAV server instance on a traditional VM, so that shouldn't be a problem. But of course, if you're using the database that is contained inside of the container and you did object changes or whatever, you might need to export, then throw away the container, start it again, re-import. Again, if you're running in Visual Studio Code, then you anyway have it outside of your database. But if you're running traditional CAL and C-side, then this is some additional effort you need to take. But if I switch back to the presentation, then it's actually something that I have on the next slide. The good and the bad about that one, you can easily connect if you know the right port. So as you've seen, I only need to type in host and then the right port, and then I could connect. The problem is you need to find out which ports are free. So if you follow some numbering rule, then you still need to make sure that the next ones are free, and you need to keep tabs which ones are already used. You probably need to open not only the development ports but also the web client ports that we use. You need to open the ports on the firewall. And if you're running on Azure and you want to connect from the outside, that becomes two firewalls, because you need to consider the firewall on the VM and you need to consider the Azure networking. And also, actually, thanks a lot for the question, because I forgot to add that one on here. Another problem is that you only can do this on container startup. You can't do this when the container is already running. You can't stop it and restart it and reassign the ports. This is only possible to do on the initial create or the first run that you're doing. There you can set the ports, but not later. So while this is possible, it's somewhat complicated, and errors, of course, are happening. The second option that we have is that we can use transparent networking. What that means is that every container gets its own IP, and depending on your network setup, it also might get its own name. So what that means is we again have our laptop, we have our Docker host, and we want to connect to those. The first container that we're running, we name it BCA for Business Central A, and that one gets its own IP address. And if we have the DNS system set up properly, then we also just can connect to it using the name BCA. Then we introduce the second container called BCB. That one also gets its own IP address and its own DNS record. You can connect to that one using BCB. And we have the third one, BCC, and we can connect to that one as well using the name. So to show you how that one works, I'll switch back. Now we're using something that's called a transparent network. So that means we have one initial setup step to do. And that is, we need to create that network. That might cause a quick flicker where the connection has gone. Now it's already in place. I can check using Docker network ls, and now I see there are a couple of default networks, and also there's our my transparent network using the transparent network driver. And we can connect our first container. Type in the clipboard text and let it start. And also I'll immediately start off the second one, so we're able to test this a bit quicker. And I'm pasting in the clipboard again. So to show you, sorry, to press enter. Okay, so to show you the difference to before, we're again accepting the end user license agreement. We're again disabling SSL. We're giving it a name, and now there's the two differences to what we did before. We now give it a host name. That's important because otherwise Docker will just assume a generated ID for the host name, and that might cause you trouble when you're using NAV, because NAV is relying on the host name of the VM or the container. And also we need to tell it that we now want to use our transparent network. So I'm adding network, my transparent network, to the Docker run command. Again, you can do the same thing using Freddy's NAV container helper if you're using that one. he has provided convenient methods and parameters for new NAV container to enable that one as well. And now we can see that the container is starting. We now also see that the host name is now set. It knows that it's publicly reachable using that DNS name. So we should be able to connect. And if we give it a couple of seconds, then we should be able to reach that one. Again, I'm using the German version for the BCDE container, and I'm using the W1 version for the BCW1 container. So we should be able to connect there. And it should be done in a minute, yes. Now you can see that it's gotten its own IP address in the range that is reachable from the client. So it no longer gets those 172 IP addresses that are only internally reachable from the host, but it gets a 192.168 IP address that is reachable in the public network. So let's try to connect to that one. Switching over here, we don't need that one anymore. BCDE/NAV. I don't need to add a port because this is just using standard port 80. I don't need to set up any mapping or anything like that. It just works out of the box. Same as if I would have been using a traditional VM. Let's see how far the second one has come. That one is also in place. So let's try to connect to that one in parallel. Again, the time it takes to log in is only because we're connecting to that one for the first time. If we're connecting for the second, third, and so on time, then it of course will be a lot quicker. But as I can only change those settings on startup, I need to remove and start those containers. So let's see.
Is there any outlook that in a future version of Docker you will be able to change that while it's running? So not having to reinstall everything?
Actually not, because that is something that the Docker and container people take kind of a different mindset on that one. They assume that you can quickly and easily replace containers. It's coming from that whole microservice environment where everything is just that tiny microservice. And it's usually starting up in like 10 seconds. It shouldn't have any state. And so it's kind of, the Docker container is kind of special because it's absolutely not a microservice. It's the opposite, whatever that is. So we're in a kind of unusual situation, and I don't think that this is something that the Docker or Windows Server people will try to support. Okay, so this is again my beautiful Verkaufsauftragsverarbeitung. So we've reached the German one. And if we give that one a second, then we should also be able to reach the W1 container and see that that one should be English. Give it a reload, sometimes that helps. Yeah, we can now, I was too quick. You could quickly see the sales order processor. And again, you can see it here. This is the sales order processor. It's English to a degree. So this is the W1 container. What that means is that now we're able to connect to those containers just using a name and are easily able to get there. So what are the good and the bad aspects of that one? You can very easily connect, even easier than the one before, because now you only need to remember a name. You don't need to remember any ports. They are available on the standard 7045 to 7049, which should be, I guess, memorable for everyone who's using that one for a lot. And in some places where the defaults are just used, like in VS Code, there's nothing you need to configure on that one. Creating a new container is quite easy. You've seen that one as well. The problem is that it needs to be allowed on your network. So there's just something that's popping up on the network, a new VM or a new container. That one needs to get a IP address. And if you want the naming to work, it also needs to be allowed to connect that IP address to a name. So this is something that needs to be set up on your network. It also needs a specific setting on your hypervisor. So on your Hyper-V, on your VMware host, is something that's called MAC address spoofing or promiscuous mode, I think, on VMware. And what that is, that usually VMs only get the network traffic that is coming in on their network interfaces, and now we have something virtual that has a different network interface, and it also needs to get that traffic. So yeah, it's just a security setting that needs to happen, and depending on the security policy of your company or the environment where you're running on, that might not be possible. And it also means that it's not directly possible on Azure VM. So I can't just spin up an Azure VM and set that one up and try to get it running immediately, because that setting is not enabled, and it's also just not allowed on the Azure network. So I can't use that one directly to connect from my laptop to an Azure VM. The setup that I'm using is it's just happening inside of the VM. There it is working, but that's probably not practical for your use case. So while this is a very good solution for on-prem, actually in my previous company, we were using that one as a default, because it makes sense on a lot of aspects. It makes it very easy to use. It still is not possible for Azure, and depending on your networking setup, that also might not be possible for your on-premise data center. So what is the solution on Azure? Imagine you have one of those aka MS, get DC, or the quick links that Freddy has provided, where you can spin up an Azure VM and have a container running on it, and now you want to run multiple of those containers. The solution for that one is a reverse proxy. What a reverse proxy does, it is able to get the incoming traffic and redirect it to something that is running on the host, or actually on different hosts as well. But for this scenario, we assume everything is running on the same host. So when an incoming connection comes in, it is able to redirect that one to container BCA. And I'm able to use the host address and then /a def, for example, for the def endpoint to connect from Visual Studio Code, or just /a to connect to the web client. So this is internally doing a mapping from a def to BCA on port 7049, or it's doing a mapping from /a to BCA port 80 or port 443 if you enable SSL. The same again is true if you're trying to connect to a container called BCB. You connect to that one from VS Code to bdef, and it internally has a mapping that maps bdef to container BCB port 7049. And you probably can imagine how that one works for a third container BCC. I get an endpoint cdef. It has a mapping from cdef to container BCC 7049, and again, I am able to connect. The beautiful thing on that one is that it's able to do this dynamically, and as I try to show here using the same symbol, the reverse proxy can also run on a container. So I'm already running on a Docker host. I'm already running in a containerized setup. So I can just add one more container that is able to handle the reverse proxy stuff. How does that one work? The easiest way to get there is to just use one of Freddy's short URLs, like aka ms get DC. This is logging me in to Azure, and I just need to add a bit of data to create a VM for that one. I'll skip the parts above. I just point out the ones that are very important for that scenario. I need to add a contact email for Let's Encrypt. What that does is it creates an SSL certificate using a free service on the internet. So I'm just adding in my email address, and then I need to make sure that I have enabled add traffic. So I'm adding add traffic, yes, and that one will set up the traffic reverse proxy. Traffic is the product that we're using here. That is also a free containerized service that we just can use. What then happens is that it does not only do the usual setup of one of the VMs, but it does some additional setup, and that one allows me to use the traffic reverse proxy out of the box. That would take something like half an hour to set up, so I've already prepared that one. And if we connect to that machine, just need to remember which name I used. Copy that one over. So I'm in my laptop now. I'm starting that one, and this is the usual connection to one of the VMs. And you can see here now that is using the Areopa-Tref moniker here. And it also tells me here that there is one traffic supported container running that is called NAV server. And if I connect to the web client, I'm just using an NAV server, admin, and now I need to remember the password that I've set. Something like this. And it should connect. And while it connects, that's not good. Here we are. I'm connecting to the virtual machine, so I can show you how creating the second one works. So this is my virtual machine that I've pre-created. You can see the address on top here as well. I'm opening the NAV container helper. And let me copy and paste that command as well. So I'm using new BC container. Pasting that one in here. Now the important thing here is to use the use traffic switch here. Apart from that, I'm accepting the end user license agreement, accepting a maybe too old container. I'm giving it a name called second. I tell it to use the Business Central on-prem container. I want to use NAV user password, and then just tell it to use traffic. If I hit that one, then I need to give it a username and password again. And it's starting, and at the same time, I'm doing the same again for a third container, just to show you that there is no limit on that one. And yeah, we keep that one running. You can see over here that the first one, the NAV server one, has already started, and we already have a connection for that one. And if we give it a minute, then the second and the third one will appear. So to give you the rundown and the details on that one, the good one is it's easy to connect again. You only need to remember the name. And if you use the landing page of Freddy's VMs, then you already have everything pre-built and spelled out for you. It's very easy to create a new one. It works on Azure. You only need one entry point in the firewall. We're always just using port 80 or 443 on the host to connect, because everything is handled through the container or through the reverse proxy. Of course, that one is a complication. We now not only have our Business Central containers, but we also have the reverse proxy container. So this is just one more component that we need to set up. As you've seen, this is for the Business Central stuff. If you use the standard scenario, that is very easy. If you want to do this by yourself, it's slightly more complicated. And you can check my my old blog for an explanation of how that works in detail. Actually, I have a couple of slides in a minute. The problem is that you can only do the web-based stuff. So the web client works, the OData and the SOAP web services work, and also the debugging works, Visual Studio Code works. But if you want to use this with the old NAV stuff, the Roadheller client and the SQL connection or Seaside connection, this one doesn't work out of the box. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, Traffic 2.0 was released, and that should support the scenario as well, but I have to admit I haven't tested that one yet. And there's still a minor bug, at least it was 2 weeks ago, where the URLs from the SOAP and REST endpoints returned were not correct, but that is kind of minor. You should be able to work around that one. So in my opinion, that one is a good solution for both worlds, either on-prem and on Azure, especially if you use the automated setup that I just shown you, then that is quite easy to set up and get up and running. The implementation, as I said, is built on Traffic. That's a cloud-native, container-native reverse proxy, so it's already very popular in the Docker and container world. It's easy to set up and run. It has integrated Let's Encrypt support and a couple of other goodies that help you when running that one technically. And the interesting thing here is that it is able to pick up new containers. So I don't need to run the container and then tell Traffic that there is a new container and I want to reach it that way. but I can use something that's called labels to do that, to give you an idea of what that looks like. I go back to the VM, start Visual Studio Code. Here we are. And I connect to Docker on that one. And I take one of those containers and click on inspect. Then I can see all the details about that container. And something that you will be able to see here are the labels that is set automatically using the NAV container helper command that. But basically it has a couple of configurations. When something comes in, I can see here that I have a typo. Sorry, I'll use that one. That's easier to understand. Let's see. Yeah. If we come in and have something that's called second DL, then it's removing that one and redirecting to port 8080. If it comes in and has as a prefix second, then it's removing that one and redirecting it to port 80. And the same for the REST and the SOAP endpoint, it's redirecting to 7048 and 7047. And the dev endpoint you can see over here, and that one is redirecting to 7049. So that one we are able to just provide some labels on Docker start, and then traffic is able to automatically pick those up and connect to it. Yes, and I've already told you how the mapping works. You can see it here also. We need a couple of additional configurations, the public O database URL and so on. So Business Central knows what is coming when it's coming from the outside, what it's called. And that one also is automatically handled by NAV container helper. You need to need a different web server instance name, but the container is able to do that as well. And then some minor quirk, traffic only picks up healthy containers. So the container needs to respond to the health check. That is basically asking it, are you ready? Are you available? But to get there, we need to go through traffic. Traffic only picks up the healthy ones. So the health check is never going to be able to work. And so we're never going to get healthy, and traffic is never going to pick up. So it's kind of an endless circle. So that one is overwritten as well in that scenario, but also that is handled automatically for you by NAV container helper. We also have a setup file if you want to take a look there as well. Yeah, and as I just shown you, this is integrated into the Azure ARM templates. If you just select use traffic, you can use NAV container helper with use traffic. And if you want to do that one on your host, the only thing that this is doing for you is it's calling the setup traffic container for NAV containers. That one is doing all the setup. And if you run that one once, then after that one, you can use the use traffic on your on-prem host as well. And it should just also work. So let's see if that one has worked. Go back to my host. Not sure why that one is trying to redirect. Let's try here again. And now we can see here, there is the second one that we started, and I have some kind of typo for this third one, so that's not correct, but let's use the second one. And we are able to connect to the second one. For the sake of time, as I only have 10 minutes left, I want to open now for questions. I could also show you how the connection using VS Code works. But again, as it's only 10 minutes left, I want to open up for questions and see if you have anything you want to ask.
Yeah, there's one on the list, again from Yuri. Actually, I was wondering if there is a kind of volume mapping for your port mapping. So if you're able to share files with a host container.
Yeah, the volumes are for sharing files, and that one you can't access through the ports or the IPs. So you wouldn't be able to share volumes across hosts. That is something that you would need to do with something like SMB share or Windows file sharing. That's the way to go there if you want to share files with your host. if you're running in the traffic setup, that is not something that is easily solved. You need to find some other way, unfortunately, like FTP or whatever you can use to connect to the host on Azure, but that is not covered on the reverse proxy scenario.
Okay, clear. No other question on the list. I had a small question myself. You showed those labels. Actually, are they dynamic or static? I reckon they're static because
those are dynamic.
No, they're dynamic. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, they are dynamic in a way because you say something like new BC container second, and that one is able to pick up that this is used or that it uses second as a name. Sorry, second as a name for that one. But while it is running, it's static. So in the beginning, it is dynamically created, and then it becomes static.
Okay.
Okay. Now to show you the connection, first of all, I'm downloading the AL extension because I'm not 100% sure if I've already installed that one here. No, you can see brand new machine. It doesn't even know about AL. So I need to give it 30 seconds to import that one. And then I can show you actually for the connection, the marketplace one might also be working. Let's see. So I'm installing from the marketplace. And then we'll try to connect to the container. As you might have seen while I've been copying that one, Freddy also has provided the configuration for your launch JSON file. So I'm not sure why it's always trying to reconnect, but redirect. But you can just use that configuration in your launch JSON file. So I'm copying that one over. And unfortunately, that is still installing. Okay. So now we're here. I'm creating a new AL project. I'm using release wave 2. And it will ask me which folder or which database server, I want to use. Now this is my own server. I need to configure it first. And now I can provide those settings. So taking that one and replacing it with what we got here. I'll save that one. Let's see if we can connect by downloading symbols. Add the username and the password. So it's sending over the request, as you can see down below here. And now we have in AL packages the system application or the application app, the system app. And because this is wave 2, we also need the base app. And now it's already there. And with that, if we give the compiler a second, yes, you can see that we've now extended the customer list. Give it a slightly different one, and then I'll just press F5. Oh. F5. And it's publishing. And then it should open up a debugging session against that server. It says success. It has published to the server. It's opening the connection. And that one. Yes, we are here. We have successfully published our app. I can do breakpoints. I can just work the usual way with Visual Studio Code, just as if that one was running in a VM or if that one was running inside of a local container. So this is just working as expected. Okay. So that is, I think, what I wanted to share. Yes. So thanks a lot for listening and watching. Thanks for your interest. And of course, I'm still happy to answer questions here or on Twitter or on LinkedIn, wherever you want to connect.
Yeah, if there are no questions in the window, so a big thanks from Yuri, but probably from all the people. His literal text is also very useful webinar. Many thanks to the speaker. So that's for you, Toby. I don't have any questions. As I'm used from you. It's very instructive, very clear. I'm going to switch just for the ending to my presentation out here. Thanks everybody for joining, of course, and a special thanks to you, Toby. Yeah, this is something, some nuts and bolts that makes a lot of things clearer to many of us. I must say for myself too, I was on the verge of getting into this situation and not yet did find time for it, and this is very helpful. Toby,
Luke,
once more.
sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, just one more thing I want to add.
Yeah.
I'll be speaking at Directions EMEA next week on the same topic. So if you've joined that webinar, then probably you don't want to join my session. Guess I'm hurting my audience there, but that's going to be very similar to that one. But of course, if you want to have a discussion, if you want to ask any question, feel free to come up at Directions EMEA. And also, I will do an extended session where I'll go into a lot more detail of the technicalities and also of the traffic implementation. And I'll also share one more scenario of how to use multiple VMs in that setup. So I don't have only one host, container host, but multiple container hosts, how to get that one to work. And that will be happening at NAV Tech Days. Yeah,
and that will be also a workshop and a session, I think, or not?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So yes, very useful. Yes, we're almost at the hour, so great planning. We're not even moved over the hour, so that's even better. Once more, thank you very much, Toby, and especially as you have been switching jobs today, it's really great that you were our speaker today. Thanks for everybody for joining. The recording will be probably out either tonight or tomorrow. That's what's normal practice. We'll meet each other in, what is it? 4 weeks time. For sure, then we have a session with Stefano D'Emiliano on Azure functions. Keep yourself updated and registered, and we'll see each other again. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.